I'm gonna say Mary did not know she was getting a fictionalized biopic on Netflix. Hello and welcome to Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below, what did you think of Mary if you saw it, or if you're waiting for this review to decide if you're going to see it or not. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you aren't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole, and getting right into the synopsis. The journey leading to Jesus' birth unfolds through his mother's eyes as King Herod seeks to put an end to it. Taking it right in positive, most of this film looks wonderful to the nature of what they're all setting up. Yes, they're colorizing the robes that wouldn't likely not have much color to it, but for filmmaking perspective, it beautifies the nature of what is all going on with the story, and it does pay homage, takes from scripture that's actually authentic to the nature of what you're going from the source material, and being able to tackle certain things that replicating it on screen, while there's also some dramatization of everything that's filler to what is not written in the Bible, and how that is all making the story a little bit more complex, building upon the characters for things we don't necessarily know. And so if you're a person that disregards the fact that this will include fictitious events, certain things are going to be filler, including alterations to what is going on with the text of the Bible, this is something that can really build upon its own presence, be an epic of sorts, not in a large scale necessarily, but it does have momentum with what it's going about. And Cohen, what we're getting out of her as Mary is just really good for her role. There's moments where she's just about to shine, and of course Anthony Hopkins just as well can deliver on a great performance. He's well known, and he makes a great Herod to some measure of what we're getting out. Everyone else delivers enough on what they're given for the script that goes about along the way. It goes on certain beats that does tackle interesting areas of the Bible that aren't covered before what we're getting out of the book in the New Testament, leading up to details that are explored within the scripture. And so that just builds upon its own momentum to what I have to say positively about this film. Going into the mix elements, it should be mentioned this is based on a book in the Bible, and so what we're all going about with this small portion of that story, just up to a couple events after Jesus is born, there's alterations to the text, to certain things, and additional parts of the story that are added in. And so if you disregard this sort of aspect of your faith or anything, and not necessarily religious in that regard, there may be a hit or miss moment for you here and there. It's a drama that goes about its own thing. Obviously, you would view it as it's a fictional story, which to this regard, as a Christian myself, most of this does come off as fictional until like 45 minutes in, where it sort of starts bleeding off parts of the text, but there's still alterations where they change a character motivation, change a part of the text that's not necessarily lining up, but it still moves forward with the plot. I'm fairly open-minded, so I did enjoy an aspect of what all was going on with the dramatization that I kind of expected out of it. I kind of suspected that they were dramatizing, especially under Netflix. They're not a faith-based studio, and so I'm not fully regarding the fact that they would do something that's fully true to what is all going on, to what this film is expressing, versus what the Bible is teaching in its own limited thing, where we don't know much about Mary, we don't know much about Herod, who they were, who they interacted with, Mary's parents that are involved with this film. So there's a lot of blurred lines that are going about to make this film possible because of how much we don't know about the previous events, and the road to Bethlehem has to be told with what is all going on. We know references to how Mary would have been as a mother raising this perfect son, the Son of God. And so how that comes about, just it has a lot of fuzzy moments that you just have to suspend your disbelief in order to understand that this wouldn't be fully 100% accurate. A couple things here and there might work for the character moments, such as with Herod, how he may have acted, but with how those events line up, just doesn't necessarily always make sense to that regard, which takes me right into the negatives, to which I have to say certain alterations to the text, while I understood and sort of suspected these things were coming up, don't necessarily have an importance to what is all going on, because if it isn't necessarily going to appeal to a non-Christian audience, and it is changing parts that makes it true to a Christian audience, yes, they have to dramatize something to make it its own film. But at the same time, if you're going to make something based on the Bible, you have to choose something else that makes a lot more sense to the story. You don't necessarily need to make a movie about the events about Mary if it's about the events before Jesus was born and leading up to that, because there's a lot more that could be done with what we're getting out of maybe raising Jesus. Even though you don't see all those moments within text, there's a lot more that could be done with the idea that obviously it's all going to be fictionalized, but there's a lot more potential for getting certain things semi-accurate to the nature of how it would be raising Jesus, and how that all flows in with his brothers, and just how that all comes about with the nature of once they have to change things or certain things are really offbeat with the story, it becomes less engaging, because also certain alterations can cause flaws or inconsistencies with what's going on with the story, and adding in Gabriel, the angel, and also Lucifer at certain points of the story where they're obviously plugged in at the wrong point, puts a wrong vision of what the angels were, how they were messengers of God, that switches the idea that there's free will or certain things that come about along the way that doesn't always measure up to the right standard of what could be done, especially in respecting a Christian viewpoint. And even if it's not necessarily doing that, it's hard to know what the author's intent would be for writing for this film, how the direction of this film takes place. That the directing can be good, certain things can be done about, but also another thing that was a problem for me, Anthony Hopkins is a great actor. He did a great performance, but there wasn't anything too extra special about his role. It feels like I've seen him even in Thor Odinson, from what we get out of that as the father of Thor, and also in Exodus or other things that come about. And he's coming off with similar fashions to that personal character, where King Herod, yes, he can have that aspect they're kind of playing off with in this, but they're sort of playing off with the wrong timeline that doesn't necessarily make sense, because there's a 3-year gap between what happens with the birth of Jesus and when Herod sent out to kill the babies, and with certain aspects of what goes on about, because there's no gap, it creates some problems with the liabilities that end up coming about, certain things that what he says makes him come off crazy, or things that just don't always fully complexize what the film or what the Bible is all portraying, that this film just makes a lot more complicated in the general long scheme of things, because they're altering certain things. Joseph's motivation may come off different than what makes sense before he was warned by the angel that this baby was Mary's as a virgin. So certain things along the way, just, I could talk about multiple different details that throws off the things, but keeping it spoiler free still, it's something that I can't figure out quite the right audience that this is all for. It's not necessarily particularly bad in some regard, besides certain details of how the inconsistencies, how the flaws come about, that alters what the Bible is showing. So while it may not be a complete wash if you're really open-minded to what it's all going on for, that's what really brings it back for, not necessarily knowing how accurate or how what they were trying to speak on the statements that they were portraying throughout this film. So that's just my personal review for Mary, which I have to rate a personal 4 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of Mary. Was it good? Was it bad? What's your background? Are you religious as a Christian, or are you not, and just decided to give it a watch anyways? And if you're now going to see it if you haven't already, or if you're not, based on what my reflection is. So make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.